Welcome to Parenting Different, a place where real adoption stories come to life. My name is Anna Bernacki, and this is the Parenting Different podcast. Hi, welcome to the Parenting Different podcast. Today we have Kristin with us today, and she is an adoptee. And I'm so excited to hear about her story. And her and I actually have a lot of similarities. We met on Instagram and have really connected over the similar parts of our stories. And so I'm really excited to chat with her today. Kristin, welcome, and share a little bit about your story.
Okay, thanks for having me. I'm excited for our conversation and excited to get to know each other outside of the Instagram world because we've been conversing on there for a little while, and I too was kind of blown away by how similar our stories are. So for myself, I am a pre-birth matched domestic adoptee, which means that the lawyer who facilitated my private adoption matched my adoptive parents with my birth mother, and the agreements were made and the papers were signed, and I went home with my adoptive parents as if they had birthed me in the hospital themselves. They were there in the hospital on the day, and I went home with them, and then everything has at least back then, has a cooling off period of about 90 days. And so I have a gotcha day, which we can talk about, but people know that term, in September. But I went home with them from day one in July when I was born. So that's me. It was technically an open adoption. Unfortunately, I did not get to meet or interact with my mother. She passed when I was about 4 years old, and we did not get to meet before that time.
Wow, that is tragic. And I have so many questions about how it was open and you didn't meet her before that time.
Yeah. So do I.
You don't have to go into that. You don't have to go into that if you don't want to.
No, all good. I think open adoption is such a term that seems simple, but no one really understands what it should mean. Open simply means that open access to the records, open access to vital information. And that even then is a paltry amount of vital information, a name, maybe a city. But really open adoption has so many different manifestations, and a lot of that depends upon the adoptive parents to decide how much access you have to your biological family. So the nidus is really on them to figure all of that out and to allow or disallow access, which is interesting.
Yeah, it really is. And I think it's very unfortunate that, as far as I know, I believe some of the laws are changing, and maybe this has changed since the last time I looked into it. But as far as I know, there's only a couple states that open adoption is legally binding for the adoptive parents. Mm-hmm. So that's a huge misconception, that really there is so much control in the adoptive parents, and they can make a lot of promises and not keep them. And really, ultimately, that hurts the child. It doesn't hurt anyone. I mean, it hurts others too, don't get me wrong, but that's who it hurts the most, is the child. And yeah, that's very, very unfortunate. My adoption was completely closed, so there was never an opportunity for me to know anything. So I guess that's one difference we have. Mine was, completely closed. So I knew nothing, and I knew I wouldn't be able to go search until I was over the age of 18. So that was, I waited for that day. Oh, that was a countdown until I was 18 because I had to know. I wanted to know all of the information and just who I was and where I came from. So it's definitely, it's rough to grow up and not know things.
Yeah, and it's rough to grow up thinking you know everything there is to know, and then find out. I was 18 too when I found out there were things I didn't know that were being kept from me because it wasn't age appropriate to share, at least in certain people's opinion. So I was around 18 when I found out everything, and it was because I had to kind of get creative. The policy that was used when I was growing up was, if she's asking, she's old enough to know within reason, right? And so it was almost like this mind game of, when is she going to figure out to ask for anything else that we have? You know what I mean? So I was 18 when I found out that there had been an antique trunk restored and refurbished that was given for my first birthday through the lawyer. And like,
Oh
I
my
had seen it
goodness.
before. I didn't know it was mine. It's just in the basement of
Oh
our
my
house, right? When I was 18, the way I asked it, by the way, was, hey, I want to know everything else you haven't told me. So if there's anything
goodness.
I don't know, or any materials you have, or do you have photos? I had never thought to ask for photos of my birth mother. Like,
Yeah,
come
because
on.
you
So
assume that that would have been shown to you,
I would have
not you
hoped,
didn't have to ask
yeah,
for it.
yeah.
Yeah.
It would have been so healing to have access to that before I was legally an adult. And on that same day, I also got a box of newspaper clippings, among which was her obituary. And reading that obituary is how I found out that I have an older brother. So
Oh
that
my
was
goodness.
not my favorite way to find out that kind of info.
No.
He actually found me on Facebook about 6 months after that, and we've met and we're in contact. But yeah, I did not know a lot of things that I found out all in one day just because I thought to ask about it in a different way. So wild.
Wow. So your world really just turned upside down in one
Mhm.
day.
Totally did.
That
Yeah.
is that is wild.
Hmm.
And I think that goes back, I say this over and over and over, and I cannot stress this enough: age appropriate honesty. It is so important. Don't make your kids ask the questions. Give them information to open those conversations, talk with them, and age appropriate honesty. You can tell them hard things, even if it's not pretty. You can tell them hard things
Hmm.
in an age appropriate way.
Oh,
Kids can
totally.
understand and they will find out. Adoptees, we're gonna sleuth through things to find what we need to find.
Yeah.
We will.
Yeah.
And it's so much better if you're just open and honest, because then there's not resentment. There's not the questions of, well, why didn't you tell me? Why did you think I wasn't worthy enough? We already hold a lot of grief. We
Hmm.
can hold hard things.
We totally
And it
can.
doesn't have to be all happy news. We can hold those hard things. But what we can't handle is the dishonesty or not giving us the truth. And that's
Absolutely. I agree
so,
with all of that. I feel like making us ask is kind of a form of parentification because kids aren't going to have the
yeah,
language for things that adults have. And
very
so
true.
forcing
Yeah.
us to kind of sit with those emotions that we don't understand, find language for them, and then think to ask the questions of what we need to know when we're not sure what's possible to know. Like, it's making us act like an adult before we've reached that maturity. So it's definitely a parental responsibility to share that info, but
Absolutely.
adoptees can handle it. I totally agree with that assessment.
Yeah. And I think there's this mindset that you want, oh, we need to protect our kids. And you can protect them from the gruesome details without leaving information out and without lying to them.
Hmm. Hmm.
There's ways around it. And yeah, you might have to get creative. And maybe you have to ask somebody, how can I reword this, and talk through it? Hire a therapist. It's always a good option.
An
Involve a
adoptee
therapist.
competent one. Yeah.
Yes, please.
Yes.
But walking through that, there are ways to walk through hard conversations, and it's so important. So, so important.
Yeah. I mean, lament is a life skill, and it took me way too long to learn that.
Yeah.
But once we can like sit with the hard parts of our stories, grieve them appropriately, hopefully with guidance, parental guidance in my grief would have been so clutch. I did not have that. And so it probably took me longer and was a harder process to learn how to like feel grief. And we're not going to move on from grief or learn how to live with it until we can properly like lament it, acknowledge it. There's an author I like who talks about metabolizing grief and hard emotions,
Mhm.
like physically. We can't do any of that unless we're acknowledging the things that were hard and able to talk about them.
Right.
Yeah.
When was it for you that you kind of had that light bulb moment of, oh my goodness, I have to grieve my own adoption? Because I don't think, I mean, we're grieving our whole lives, but we're not processing it
Mhm.
appropriately, and we're
Mhm.
not naming that grief until we come to that realization. So when was it that you that kind of hit you, and how did you kind of reconcile that and process through that?
It amazes me that my answer to this is my early 30s. Like, I was kind of at the pinnacle, if you will, of achievement, which for me, like, there are multiple paths we can all take as adoptees with our grief and how we handle it or avoid it, right? And mine was achieving. I reached the pinnacle of the career that was kind of, I'm not going to say I was forced into it. I'm going to say that I was heavily influenced to pursue this career that I ended up totally hating, right? Just it wasn't a good fit. And I had convinced myself along the way that I would be helping people and that's what I wanted. And every time I would question it, was kind of gaslit back into it. Like, well, you're in this deep now. It's going to get better. It never got better. So I'm in my early 30s. Like, I'm in a career I hate. What do I do? I feel stuck. Plus, I was facing some health challenges physically that were really like in my way. And so honestly, it did feel like at the time I was like, this is such a cliche. I'm hitting rock bottom, but everything had fallen apart in my early 30s. And I was like, why? Why is it that I feel like I have never been happy? I'm never going to be happy again. Like, what's up? And I was doing therapy for other reasons. I was guessing like, maybe this is it. Maybe this is it. Couldn't figure it out. So I start EMDR, which, by the way, highly recommend EMDR if you can find an adoptee competent therapist who practices EMDR. Like, oh, so helpful. And as we go through sessions, a few sessions in, all of a sudden I'm like, maybe there's something to the fact that I'm adopted that I've just not taken into account. And being the research heavy, as a physician at the time, that was the first career. I care a lot still about evidence-based medicine and evidence-based practice in other ways. So I start digging in the science and I'm like, where's the research about being adopted? Like, is there something to this? Absolutely. The research is there. It is major trauma, has myriad life effects. I start reading about, the statistics about adoptees, especially those of us who haven't had adoptee competent therapists, care, adoption competent adoptive parents. And it just like blew me away. I was like, this is exactly what I'm experiencing. So I can't believe it was that late in life, but it was. And it took me looking it up to figure out what all I was going through. But I'm glad it happened. So much has improved. I'm in a much better place with my physical and mental health. I'm much happier. I'm pursuing a career that I think I wanted to all along. But yeah, early 30s, couldn't believe it.
It was honestly the same for me. I was in my 30s as well. And I think like being adopted just was, right? Like it wasn't something I didn't love it, didn't hate it. It just was. And I had never thought that could affect me. I never thought that, it did, it impacted things, but I never put all the puzzle pieces together. And it wasn't until I adopted my own kids and I watched them go through that grief and I was like, oh my goodness, this is what. So now we have a house full of grieving adoptees, which is such a mess. That was a rough couple of years. And that really is. And then I went to, as an adoptive parent, even still not acknowledging my own grief, went to Instagram and started like trying to find a community and and all of a sudden I found this community of adoptees and I was like, oh, I'm like that too. Oh, I thought that too. Wait a minute, I do that too. And it was so validating that I'm not weird. I'm not strange. Like these were all symptoms of being adopted and I never knew. And so putting that all together and kind of acknowledging that and really starting, and then of course therapy, being with a therapist, I love her dearly. I've been with her for like 3 years now and she's with me for life, whether she likes it or not. We're lifers here. She's got me for life. But in processing all of that and going through that, it was this huge realization of everything that had been invalidated or brushed aside by me or adoptive parents or the environment I was in. It was just so dismissed. And being able to process that, the joy, like, yes, there was grief, but going through that, the joy I found. And I think that that is something that we don't talk about enough, is like the other side of it, is that there's this joy in finding who you really are, finding that these things are okay, and you can label it and you can name it and you can put it in its place, and then just be yourself. And there's so much joy in that.
Mm-hmm. Oh, totally agree. Validation is I feel like it's a key that unlocks a lot for us. Of like, I
Yes,
don't have to
absolutely.
keep focusing on how hard it's been. I can still acknowledge that, but I don't have to like obsessively think about how hard it's been or how hard it is when I have the validation of, like you said, the adoptee community, which fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Fellow adoptees. Instagram has been a big resource of finding fellow adoptees, but like there are some awesome like resource groups out there, meetup groups, like however we
Yeah.
can access each other, because the validation of community, like you said, can, I feel like, unlock that freedom of, okay, this is horrible and it happened to me and it wasn't good, but it's not my identity. It's not who I am. I actually get to go figure out who that is, and the joy of being who you are and freedom without the dismissal you were talking about, like healing to the max. It's the best. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think both you and I, this is something that we also share in common, is our environment growing up
Mm-hmm.
was so similar. And this is kind of your expertise. And I would love for you to talk about how the church had really impacted you as an adoptee in your identity. Because I think we both have, yeah, I was horrifically impacted by the church I grew up in. And um yeah, I would just love to hear your journey through that and kind of how you've navigated still keeping your faith and who God is, but not who the church told you you were.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good way to phrase it, I think. Um, I feel like I should start with like the buzzword of deconstruction, because it is the word I
Mhm.
use for both reckoning with adoption and reckoning with faith. I think a lot of people have a misconception that deconstruction means deconversion. Like,
Yeah,
deconstructing evangelical Christianity means I'm leaving the faith altogether, and that's not necessarily true. And so a big passion for me is that I experienced deconstruction of both, as you said, the things that were told about me and my identity when it comes to adoption within the church, the things that were told to me about my identity in Christ as an adoptee. Like, I have deconstructed those, and all that means is I've gone back and reevaluated them in light of what the Bible and what Christ actually says, in light of the Holy Spirit within me and the wisdom that he gives. And I've come to the conclusion that Jesus is still good. I'm still a disciple of him, but a lot of the things I was raised to believe about that are not true. And that's a
yeah,
tough process to go through. It's, I think, a continual one. I feel like every day I'm discovering something new and having to be like, okay, Lord, I'm holding this up to your light. Like, what is the truth in this, or how much of this is like harmful Christianese? So
right.
um, I think around the same time I started with the deconstruction of adoption, I also started deconstructing faith, because for me, and I think for you, from what we talked about, they were super intertwined. Like, my adoptive parents adopted because they couldn't have children of their own,
Mhm.
and because they felt like it was God's plan or the call on their life. I have talked to other adoptive parents within churches I've been in throughout my life, and heard them say that they adopt because they think it's a picture of the gospel. And, understandably so, because Paul has a great metaphor in the New Testament about, adoption. But adoption Roman times, very different from current modern day adoption in roots,
Right.
in justice, etc. So I think that comes as a justification, missing the context of the world in which it was made, the metaphor was made. So I
Absolutely.
grew up basically thinking it was God's plan for me to be taken away from my biological parents. I did not even know who my bio dad was at the time. That's a whole other interesting story. And I grew up believing that they were sinners and that God saved me and put me into a good Christian family because he wanted me to know him. And that's why I was adopted. Super harmful to me, but also to other people. I remember very clearly
Right.
going on a mission trip, which, hello, whole other topic of the harms of
Yes.
Christianity, but was on a mission trip somewhere. Some of us were asked to share our testimonies when we went to church with the group that we visited. And we kind of like were giving the rundown of what we planned to say beforehand to, at the time, just some like, I'm so grateful for the gentleness and godliness of the leaders of that trip, because when I shared what I was going to say about how God's plan for my life was adoption and that's why I'm saved, they were like, ooh, this was, by the way, not, it was a church of the global majority ethnically, not of the American majority, if you know what
Gotcha.
I'm saying.
Yes.
And so me sharing that in order to be close to God, your children need to be raised by white people is really harmful. And so, like,
Yeah.
looking back at the time, it didn't quite click with me that adoption was the problem, but like, that was my actual testimony at the time. And that is super harmful because it likens
Sure.
the act of being curious about your roots to going back to a life of sin. When we have the evangelical gospel of, we start with sin and then Christ's death saved us and now we're right with God, and we miss the beginning of we were created good. You know, the Genesis
Right.
1 testimony rather than Genesis 3, as applied to adoption, basically means that adoptees are second-class citizens, and we needed a second salvation of our adopters in order to be right with God. Well, that is the message I was receiving as a child, even though I,
Yeah.
wouldn't
Same.
have explained that to you. And
Yeah.
that
I
right
wouldn't have been
there,
able to put that into words, but yes, that's what's internalized.
yeah, that's an anti-gospel. And it just, like, I'm going to use a little bit of harsh language, but it sickens me. It really does, that this is what we're preaching to children. And Jesus was very, firm about what he thinks about misleading children.
Yes.
And so this is like the burden of my heart, right? Is that churches are not just to children who are adopted, but to those of us in the church who are adults now, just preaching this gospel of second-class citizenship. And that applies to so many other isms within the church, right? But adoptees are part of
Sure.
that. And it is amazing to me, some of the Christian community I was in that was so resistant to me telling that truth as I was learning it. I've lost a lot of friends who I had within the church because I spoke up and said, hey, I actually think I'm part of a group of the church that's being oppressed and ostracized, and that's not cool. And it's amazing, like, the
Yeah.
resistance I met. I don't know if that happened to you as you were reevaluating your own faith, but speaking up about it has lost me a lot of community, and that's sad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It definitely has. And I think, too, what you're saying about second class, I don't know that, like, I struggle with this because that is a generational thing. And I think that I would say that started more like my grandparents' time frame. And so I'm not sure that my parents necessarily were intentionally
Yeah.
being harmful with it,
Mm-hmm.
but they also weren't checking that mindset against scripture.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just, well, that's what it means because so and so said it.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're not sitting there looking and saying, how is this going to harm my child? How is this going to harm my child? I remember sitting in a conference, and thankfully my parents did speak up on this one because this one was interesting. This was a different perspective, but it was somebody talking out against adoption. We were at like some conference or something, and the speaker said, don't adopt because the sin chain follows the through the father, like the sins of the father, and you don't know who the father is a lot of the time, so you don't know what kind of sin you're bringing into your home by
Mm.
adopting, so don't adopt.
Mm.
Like, what? How are we? But there's so many people sitting there, amen, and going along with this, and we're sitting there as an adoptive family going, what? Are you kidding me? And so, like, now you are telling the adopted kids, and you don't know who in that room is adopted and who's not. You have
Mm-hmm.
no clue, but you are not,
Mm-hmm.
and there were lots of kids in this room. So you are now telling these kids that they brought unwanted sin into their families. So if you do anything wrong, you're now this horrible person that is bringing something to the family that they didn't deserve.
Oh my gosh.
It's
Yeah. You
Yeah,
said the
it's
quiet part
insane.
out loud, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
How, like, we have to be so mindful. And I think as adoptive parents, and this is something going from adoptee to an adoptive parent now, the thing that I look through over and over and over again is, how is this going to affect my child? We have to have, like, adoptive parents in the church, everything has to be child centered.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be,
Yeah.
because adults have a fully developed frontal lobe and they can discern and determine what they are going to believe. But when we are impacting the child, they are trusting adults that whatever is said is true, and they are absorbing everything around them. And we have to have discernment in what we are telling them, because maybe that's not what we exactly meant, but what is the message that they are receiving?
Mm-hmm.
Because I've always known that I was second class. Always. And I know my parents didn't intend for me to think that growing up. I know they didn't mean for me to absorb that mentality, but I always knew it.
Mm-hmm.
And I also, and I don't know if this was an experience for you too, but I always watched, because we didn't have any biological kids in our home. So there were three of us. We were all adopted, but from different families. So nobody was biologically related to anyone growing up, which made for a very interesting home growing up. But we, I would watch my friends and their parents, and I could tell something was different. I knew. I couldn't put words on it. I couldn't explain it, but there was a connection between them and their parents, them and their siblings. There was something different, something that did not exist in my home. And I knew it was adoption, but also I kind of sometimes blamed it on religion too. And I think it was a combination of the two, but mostly because I didn't have that biological connection. And there's something about a biological connection that you just cannot deny.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's real. It is so real.
Yeah.
So did you experience that too, where you would watch your friends and you're like, there's something different there, and I want that.
Yeah. And this is totally another example of kids know, even if at that time don't have words for things, right? I grew up in a family where I was the only adoptee, but I had two younger siblings who were biological to my adoptive parents.
Okay.
Which is wild. We were super close in age. So it was almost like a few months after I'm in the home and all of a sudden surprise pregnancy. And then a few months after that baby was born, another surprise pregnancy, right? So I had two younger siblings in that home. And I don't know that I would have told you this growing up, but in hindsight, absolutely could see a difference in the relationships between parents and those siblings with each other, and did feel, once again, unintended, I'm sure, but ostracized,
Yeah.
100%. And there was a lot of like self-isolation, I think, of trying to figure out what all this meant, or what I felt about it, or what was going on with me that I didn't quite understand. Got labeled kind of the weirdo for it, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's so interesting you say that, because that dynamic like was right within my own house, and I definitely saw a
That's
difference. And having met bio family now, because, you know, praise the Lord, I did get to meet my dad, even though my mom has passed. And I have siblings on that side as well. And so meeting them, like, it is a difference. That's just how it is. Biology means something. That's
yeah.
how we were created. Like, the Lord is a God of generations, and we see it in how, you know, how we encounter our own biological families. And I know not every story allows for, you know, staying in healthy contact with biological family,
Right.
but for me, thankfully, it was a healthy situation, and I could definitely tell the difference with the ease with which we kind of started to communicate the things we had in common that you wouldn't
Yeah.
expect, you know. um, Definitely different than the home I grew up in, and the relational dynamics there.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So how was that, like, for you, and finding and solidifying your identity when you did meet your dad? Because I don't know, how long ago was it that you met him?
2023. It's been a couple years now. Yeah.
Okay. So
Yeah.
I just met my biological dad I think it was 2024. So just recently.
Hmm.
And it was so interesting, like immediate answers as to who I was.
Hmm.
Things I never would have associated with biology. And it was mind blowing. Did
Hmm.
you experience that as well?
Hmm. I think one of the most intriguing things I noticed at that time. was that my dad has this like beautiful sensitivity about him, this beautiful like
Mm,
thoughtfulness and gentleness that I share. Um, and the way I grew up, it was kind of a liability at times. Like, oh, you're just too sensitive. Like you take things too seriously. But that makes sense now. Like I get that from
yeah.
somewhere, and I'm able to see it as more of a gift because I know where it comes from. If that makes sense. Um, Talk about like you're talking about the gift of validation. Like that was a form of validation that I could only get
Yeah.
from having met my biology. Another funny story I like to tell is my younger sister and I have a lot of similarities, but our voices are very similar. Like if you heard each of us speak on a
Oh,
recording,
wow.
you might not be able to tell the difference. And I got to have them come for Christmas last year. And I have
Oh,
2 dogs, and it was so funny. My sister and I were alone in the room with my pup, and he kept looking at her and then at me when she was talking because he was like, "Mom, what?" Like my dog
there's
was
two of you.
confused. So that was a really cool,
So
validating
crazy.
story. And then I'm trying to think of like there are so many that I could share that are so helpful. Oh, the first time I got to see a picture of my bio mom. So we talked about how that was not till I was an adult, but I did not know I have curly hair until like after that photo. I always just assumed I had like unmanageable bushy hair because everyone in my adoptive family has straight hair. And so I was taught to
Okay.
care for my hair as if it was the same texture.
Yeah.
And it turns out my hair's not unmanageable. It just needs to be cared for in a way that I wasn't equipped to learn how to take care of. So that's been a gift too of like, even though I've never met my mom, getting to see her
Yeah.
photo and going, oh, curly
That's
hair.
very good. Yeah.
Cool. This is something I didn't know I was dealing with. So yeah, it can be super validating, I think. Not that reunions without its own challenges, but
For sure.
yeah,
For
huge
sure.
gift. And again, I know that's not for every adoptee. It can certainly be, a difficult experience, but I'm grateful that amongst a lot of hard stuff, that gift came along and it was really good for me. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I had an interesting experience with my reunion with my birth dad because I never realized that my personality, like, I don't know. I'm not around anyone biologically related to anyone, right? Like,
Hmm. Hmm.
I, I just wasn't. So for me, that's just, I don't know why I never connected the dots on that I might have gotten that from someone. But
Hmm.
I'm loud, I'm obnoxious, I'm very opinionated, I'm fiercely want justice. Like I will, like, if something is right and I know I'm right, I will fight you on it because I it's not that I have to be right, it's that right has to be right.
Right
Like
matters.
you
Yeah.
have, yes.
Yeah.
And I have to, I will fight for it. So growing up in the evangelical Christian home, it was be quiet. You need to be meek. You need to submit to authority. Especially because I was a girl. Like I shouldn't be speaking in front of men. Um, Definitely don't challenge a man. And I could not control myself, which sounds terrible, but like I literally couldn't. I just had this in me that I couldn't keep it in.
Hmm.
And so I was disrespectful. I was defiant. I had all these labels and it really bothered me because I didn't want to be that way. And I
Hmm.
remember praying and being like, God, make me like, why can't I control my mouth? Like the whole read James, that was driven into me, control the tongue. And I'm like, why? Why can't I?
Hmm.
And it wasn't literally a year and a half ago. I met my biological dad and I was like, oh my goodness, that's it. I am exactly like him.
Hmm.
My sense of humor, my like everything is exactly like him. And it took how many years of feeling like a failure, a sinner. I didn't want to be this way. I couldn't. And finally, I realized that was literally running through my veins. There was nothing I could ever do about it. And yes, there's, of course, appropriate and inappropriate ways to communicate. And, you learn that growing up. But who I was And since then, I have like, I've just embraced it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been so beautiful to realize like, I don't have to suppress this. I don't have to sit down and shut up. Like, I can embrace this. And it's been, I mean, even honestly, truly, a year and a half ago, I wouldn't have been doing this podcast
Mm-hmm.
because I would have felt like I'm too opinionated and would offend somebody and I can't have a conversation. And in meeting and seeing that it was in my DNA was so freeing and validating
Yeah.
because the church had tried to force me to be someone else.
Yep.
And I literally couldn't be that person.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So poignant. And how I share your joy in like realizing that you're not a liability. You know what I mean? Like realizing that those things about you are a gift from God and not a liability. I feel like adoption and church share a similarity that neither should have. I think of this idea of assimilate or die almost. Like, you know, I
Yeah.
think a lot of adoptees, especially growing up, feel like we have to like assimilate to our adoptive families in order to maintain the safety of relationship because we
Mhm.
have this sense of innate loss. We've already experienced the biggest loss you can have,
Right.
you know, losing your maternal bond. And so we feel like we have to do whatever it's going to take to maintain the relationships we do have, or else we feel unsafe. And I feel like honestly a similar message is preached in church of like, well, Christian community is really important, so you know you need to toe the line or you might get, you know, ostracized, excommunicated, whatever word you want to use. And I feel like neither of those settings is that mindset appropriate. You know what I mean? That
Right.
assimilate or die thing. Like the Lord has made us diverse, and that's a beautiful thing.
Yes.
And we need truth
100%.
tellers. If we silence all our truth tellers and ask them to assimilate, what do we have left?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah. And I think we also have such a unique opportunity to use all the diverse gifts. And I don't know how it happened. I don't know whether I was like special ordered or what, but I looked like my adoptive family.
Mm-hmm.
If you saw our family, you would never ever have guessed that we were adopted. All of us looked very similar to each other. We looked like our parents. Seeing us on the street, you would never have thought that there was an adoption story, which I think also created a lot of, I then had to fit in every other way because that was a common thing that people said like, oh wow, you would never be able to tell. Well, I better keep up that appearance and sit down and shut up and like
Uh-huh.
keep the peace because I and that was always presented as a good thing, like you can't tell as a good thing. And it was very common that we heard that
Mm-hmm.
from random, anywhere from a random stranger to, well, random strangers didn't know, but it just was very very common. But I think also then going into adopting my own kids, we are a transracial family and I love it. I love that it brings its own challenges, don't get me wrong, and its own brokenness. And I recognize that. But I love when we walk in somewhere that people immediately know there's an adoption story there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not a secret. It is loud and proud. Like, well, people know that we are not biologically connected to each other at all. I have had questions. Somebody asked me, what race is your husband? Like, they're trying to figure out how my kids got so dark. I was like, maybe we rephrase that question, but
Mm-hmm.
it's sometimes you gotta laugh at the inappropriate questions because otherwise you're gonna scream. But
Mm-hmm.
like, what do you want me to tell you? But I love that we do, when we walk in somewhere, we do tell that story. And well, they don't know the details of our story, obviously, but like we are uniquely different. And I think it's so important too, because so many adoptive parents will say, well, I don't make my child conform. I don't I don't tell them they have to be like us. You don't have to.
Mm-mm. Yeah.
You don't have to tell us that. It's just in our nature to want to fit in, to want to, and I didn't even have biological siblings, but I can imagine that's even more so with you
Mhm.
having siblings who are biologically related to the parents. I think that that has to be so hard to be able to be your unique self in any way, shape, or form
Mhm.
because you have such a desperation to belong and fit in.
Mhm. Absolutely. I think, you know, let this be a theme, I guess, of what we've talked about today, but like, even if it's not intended, things are being communicated. And so
Yeah.
I'd say to the adoptive parents out there, like, be extra intentional in what you're communicating with your children. Think extra intentionally about what other people are saying around your kid that they might be picking up on in a way that even they recognize, right? Like similar stuff was said to me all the time growing up of, oh, you look just like your adoptive dad, or, of the three of us in the family, like I had similar coloring, whereas we randomly ended up with two brunette parents and a blonde kid, right? And so it was like, oh, I would have thought that other sibling was the one who was adopted, not you. And like, okay, it feels weird that people make
Yeah.
conjectures about like parentage in general, in my opinion. But then also to think, as you were saying, like, okay, everyone assumes that I am part of this family naturally or biologically, so I should probably just like keep up appearances, right? And so that makes any
Mhm.
individuality you might grasp for, especially in like some really important, teen years of puberty and identity formation, like any individuality you might reach for intentionally or unintentionally gets kind of squelched. And we're
Yeah.
back to that invalidation and how it can make us like physically and mentally ill, like very sick.
Yeah.
And so I think, yeah, it's super important to celebrate differences. And I think in adoptive families or families with adoption stories, like have to be extra intentional, not just about communication direct from parent to child and back, but what the world is saying and addressing that, right? Like,
Exactly.
I think
Yeah.
if I had to guess, being a successful adoptive parent probably means being able to have an extra open line of communication with your children, even more so than just being, a good communicator. You have to be an extra good
Oh, for
communicator.
sure. And I think addressing those things, we can't control what other people say, right? They're going to say what they're going to say,
Mm-hmm.
but you can, instead of just smiling and nodding, you can roll your eyes and acknowledge that with your kid
Mm-hmm.
and be like, what?
Mm-hmm.
Are they crazy? I mean,
Yeah.
one woman looked at my oldest and I, we were in a waiting room at a doctor's office. She goes, oh my goodness, you guys look just alike. You have the same smile. And we literally, as soon as she walked away, we busted up laughing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that is the most absurd thing for someone to say.
Mm-hmm.
Why would you say something like that?
Mm-hmm.
No, we don't. Like, we do absolutely do not have the same smile. We do not have, like, she's black and I'm very, very white. Like,
Mm-hmm.
no, there was, why would you say you guys look alike? And maybe she thought she was giving us a compliment or something. But I think in that moment, we still laugh about that day because they're like that crazy lady. And
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important to not brush those things off, but to acknowledge them and say, that lady's off her rocker. Like, clearly we don't look alike and we don't have to. We
Mm-hmm.
can belong and not be the same. And I
Absolutely.
think that is so important to allow our kids to belong and still be them their individual selves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a lie that was believed in the family I was raised in is if we pretend that Kristen's biological to us, then it will be so. It will just that will make it reality. To the point where I was even told multiple times, well, we just like to pretend that you belong to us and that you don't have like the erasure of who I am in that case, um, is again probably not intended. People say weird
Right.
stuff in the waiting room because they don't know what to say, but that doesn't make it not a microaggression.
Right. For sure.
And so I think like one of the biggest things I learned is that pretending this wasn't the story was actually wrong, and it wasn't a loving thing to do, whether that was assumed or whether that was the intent. Like it was harmful. It is harmful.
Yeah.
I think like truth is probably one of the most important things about being in a family where there's an adoption story. Telling the truth, not pretending it
Absolutely.
doesn't exist, acknowledging it, even the hard parts, even the spiky bits. Like,
Yep.
yeah.
Because we will find out.
Yeah.
We are information sleuths. We will find it out
Mm-hmm.
one way or another. And it's better if you know. I mean, if you don't know, don't make something up. But like,
Right.
if you don't know the answer to our question, just say, I don't know. But there is always, always an age appropriate way to tell the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's just so important because, and I think for me, and I would assume with you too, in doing what we're doing now and creating an online presence and speaking up about these things, is ensuring when you know better, you do better. And our parents may not have known, but we can make sure that the next generation of parents does know
Mm-hmm.
so that they can do better and those kids don't have to go through the same things that we did.
Yeah, definitely, 100%. And I think my biggest mission is to help other adoptees feel connected, to to
Mm-hmm.
know we're not alone in our journeys. And they the only thing that's true about all of us is that all of our stories are different, as similar as yours and mine are.
Right. They're still uniquely different. Yeah.
Right, but in that, like, we still share enough similarities that, like, we can support each other in that. And so, like, in talking about my faith journey as it related to deconstructing adoption and faith at the same time, like, I want other adoptees to know that even if maybe your deconstruction did lead to deconversion, or maybe you're still not sure, or, you know, maybe you're scared to even think about it right now, like, no matter where you're at on that journey, like, you have a friend, you have a walking partner in it. And, like, it's safe to examine things together. Like, God's
Yeah.
not going to abandon you because you started asking questions. And I think that's so important.
Right. Well, and I think that is actually, that just was a light bulb moment there for me, even. Like, I think we are, in a way, as adoptees, told not to ask questions.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that's an unspoken thing, right? We're not always told we can't ask questions, but it could be the body language of when we do ask a question. It could be a facial expression. It could be the short answer and not where it's communicated to us that it's not safe to ask questions. So if it's not safe to ask questions about who we are, then we definitely aren't safe to question what the church is teaching or what, like, that's very scary
Mm-hmm.
because if we can't even know ourselves and our own story and or story of origin, then asking big questions to a big church and big people like
Yeah.
that's very, very scary.
Yeah.
And so I think it is so important, like, it is okay to ask questions
Mm-hmm.
about anything. Like, it's
Yeah.
okay to ask.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something I really love about what I've learned about Jewish culture and the culture that Jesus would have grown up in when he was a kid. It's a question of asking, and asking questions even about and of God. Like, I think that's super powerful. Also, side note, a bit of theology from Ted Lasso too, right? Be curious, not judgmental. I think has been such a healing principle for me, even in faith. And I think if it had been modeled to me as a kid, of, when I'm asking questions, even if you don't know the answer, I wonder if my parents had said, I don't know, but let's talk about why you're curious, or let's talk about where that question came from. If it had been met with that instead of, as you said, like, we can always tell when the question we ask makes someone else uncomfortable. It would
Yeah.
have taught me that, even if my question wasn't answered, it was okay to be asking. And so I think, like, curious, not judgmental in parenting, curious, not judgmental in faith space is, like, such a good principle. And it just came from an interesting place.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, for sure. Well, thank you so much for joining me. This has been amazing. I think this is such an important conversation, and I'm so glad we were able to have it and be able to share some more of our stories and even get to know each other better. This was really good. So I
Yes, same
appreciate you
here.
joining.
Yeah,
Okay,
super glad
thank
we
you.
got to do this.
Yes, thank you.